It's great to be back again this year, and thanks for, we had a pretty good year last year for public transit, and you were the reason, so thank you. And Valerie's leadership and Michael Milanofi's leadership, and really staying in the faces of members of Congress, continuing to remind my colleagues in the House and Senate how important public transit is. Collect stories, and I'll talk about that a little at the end, but collect stories about how you make a difference in people's lives, because people want to talk dollars and funding and buying buses and bus routes and all, but there are so many. You provide a service that nobody else does, and especially for low-income Ohioans who are not getting, low-income Ohioans too, of course, but low-income Americans who just don't often get a fair shake in life. One of the things Valerie was talking about was lead. And the tension of Flint, Michigan obviously was one thing, and that was just horrible, and that was created by government, by pretty much an uncaring state government. But we also know in a place like Cleveland, and where you represent, I know in my state, virtually every big city, especially cities that are older as they are sort of throughout the Northeast and Midwest, but really everywhere, homes that are 50 and 60 years old have high percentages of them have high toxic lead levels in their homes. And I was talking to the president of the World Bank last night, who told me that when you think about lead, you think about stunted growth, that children don't develop if they're exposed to lead when they're very young. And he talked about that as a worldwide problem, where children with less than adequate nutrition and exposure to either violence or things like lead, that it's a huge percentage, more than a third of children in the world right now are threatened with stunted growth. They literally will never develop physically or mentally the way they need to. And I know that's not an issue of transit, but it's an issue of a lot of the people whom you serve, who have fewer options in life than those of us that dress like this, and all of us that have the kind of titles we do. I appreciate so much what Ohio Transit does. Curtis Stitt, whom I first knew when he worked in the Secretary of State's office 30 years ago in Columbus. He's breaking ground in their first bus rapid transit line soon. I appreciate the work he's doing. Donna McNamee from Lake Tran, I think, is here. She was here last year. If Donna didn't make it this year. Mark Donaghy with Dayton RTA has worked closely with this office on funding, and he's done something I won't mention at the end of my speech, that's particularly important. Stark Area Regional Transit Authority is expanding their fleet of fuel cell buses. Cincinnati, the streetcar, will be starting. Earl Blumenauer was actually helpful with us on that. In my hometown of Cleveland, Joe Calabrese of Cleveland RTA is preparing for the Republican National Convention this summer. And I'm very much a Democrat. I don't believe I'll be supporting Donald Trump for president. I'm sure many of you in this room will, but I don't know what you're going to do. But I am thrilled they're coming to Cleveland, and I keep offering to do a speech at the Republican National Convention. I've told them I'd be willing to talk about filling a Supreme Court vacancy. I've told them I'd be willing to point out that for 35 or 40 years, Republican politicians have dog whistled about race, and then they're just shocked when Donald Trump starts barking. I'd be willing to do that, but they still haven't called. But Joe will take good care of the some 50,000 visitors. That's the number I think we're expecting. And I'm hoping, this is not as a Democrat, no, this is as a Cleveland resident. I'm hoping for a contested convention, not because I really have a dog in the fight, but because if they stay a second week, it'll mean a lot more fares for Cleveland RTA. So that's all right too. As I said at the beginning, thanks for your help on what you did on the FAST Act. This would not have happened anything close to what we wanted to happen if it weren't for the activism, if it weren't for the activism of APTA and the individual push from so many of you. So you're coming here last year, the discussion we had, I made 3 commitments to you last year, and I went back and wanted to be precise about what I said. And last year at the breakfast, I said we'd fight for a long-term transportation bill. I said we'd fight for it. I was not at all certain we'd end up with one. that would provide certainty and make real investments. I know from my conversations with so many of you, with Kirk, with Mark, with Curtis, with so many of you, that how important certainty is and predictability, and preferably a 5 or 6 year bill. I said we'd fight for a fair share of funding for transit. That looked at one point like it might not happen to the degree that it ultimately did. And many of you helped save the day there, and we would ensure new investment for buses. We won those fights, and again, in large part because of you. During the debate last summer, at one point, the 20% historic commitment looked like it wasn't going to happen. And we were able, the banking committee Democrats were able to convince the whole Democratic caucus that there is no deal here, including people that were further out and wanted a deal of some kind, almost no matter how it looked. But we held firm that there is no deal here without the continued pledge of transit money. And that was in the end the key to getting a bill that worked for all of us. Again, that 20% threshold, I want more than that. But we needed the mass transit account to stay solvent. We won the fight for new competitive bus funding, though I wish that FTA could distribute even more than the $268 million. That's, you take what you get in the end, but we will always be pushing for a higher number there because we know what it means to you all over the country, in smaller communities and in big cities alike. With this, I want to talk a little about long-term. We admit that, I'd be the first to admit that I think what we did doesn't address long-term infrastructure the challenges we have. The way this bill was funded was frankly a bit ludicrous to take the money out of the Federal Reserve. There are obviously we've used to fund transportation in this country with a user fee, and certain politicians sign pledges to certain lobbyists saying they won't do certain things, and it makes this so much harder. But over time, this needs to be sustained. We've got the funding for 6 years, something that didn't look that attainable as late as late summer last year, or maybe even into the fall. But we know we've got to come up with something better. Our parents and grandparents left us with a transportation system and public infrastructure that was the envy of the world. And when I say infrastructure, I don't just mean transportation. I mean water and sewer and not just bus and highway transportation, water, sewer, airports, ports, community colleges, even medical research. I put all that into public dollars, public investment. We say infrastructure, we used to say public works, and it's sort of like we don't want to use the word public. What we've done, we created huge wealth in this country after World War II because we invested in public works. And again, it's water and sewer. Part of the problem with Flint is a problem in communities all over the country. Part of the problem with lead in homes is we just don't build infrastructure or public works the way that we used to. And we've recoiled from that. We led the world in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, into the Reagan years. We led the world in infrastructure and public works. Nobody had ever seen anything like it in world history. It was also our wealthiest time as a nation when we invest in public underlying public works and set the table and build a foundation to do so much else. We're great at creating private wealth, especially for the 1 or 2 or 5%. We're not so great in our country today at building public wealth that leads to better, more prosperous lives than for everybody. So when we were leading the world in the 40s into the Reagan years now, measured in different ways, we're 20th or 30th in public works and infrastructure. That's why for a meaningful long-term investment, you need to, and I need to help keep the pressure on my colleagues in Congress, in the House and Senate, in both parties. Let me give you one route here, short of a gas tax, which is dead on arrival, as we say around here in our cliche-ish way of talking sometimes in this Congress, at least right now. But there's potential comprehensive tax reform we're considering now that could meet some reality in 2017. Let me talk a moment about that, and then I'll wrap up. If we could reach a deal on a new international corporate tax system to shut down tax havens, about companies that that invert. They buy a smaller company internationally, then they shift their corporate headquarters to Ireland or somewhere. And a company in Cleveland, as Joe knows, a company called Eaton, saved $160 million in their taxes. Saved is the word they use. And by doing inversion, it's happened with Burger King. It's happened with a number of companies. Drug companies are trying to do it now. And even though taxpayers have funded a lot of medical research and taxpayers have made these companies, these taxpayers and American people have made these companies prosperous and successful, but nonetheless, that's what we've seen. There are billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars overseas. There is talk of bringing that money back, taxed, not at the total corporate rate, but a lesser rate, but taxed in a way that would bring serious money to what should be public works. At the same time, so that companies don't do that again, don't again start moving monies offshore and parking it there, expecting again some repatriation. We would at the same time levy a minimum international tax. So regardless of where their money was, they paid a significant, now again, not as high as the corporate rate here, we'll never pass it, but a significant tax rate that would end this moving money overseas. I mean, as long as we continue to give incentives, we've seen something happen in this country in the last 30 years that I don't think economic history had ever seen in the world, where a company will shut down in Mansfield, Ohio, and move to Beijing, and then get a tax break, and then sell their products they make in Beijing back into Ohio, back into the United States. And it's a business plan that's far too common. I don't even blame anybody individually. It's what we've allowed as a society to happen. Doing tax reform right would make a major dent in doing that. Let me conclude with a story. Just the kind of story I hope you'll tell when you lobby some of your House and Senate members. I was with a woman in Youngstown one day. A city that was once, 50 years ago, had the highest per capita income of any city in America, Youngstown, Ohio, and where the steel industry was going really well, and there was just a lot of wealth in that community. It's not a community like that anymore. It's been hit hard, buffeted by trade policy, tax policy, technology, all the things that have happened in our country, and especially in a place like my state. And there's a woman in Youngstown that she put a map, because it had a town hall, and she and some of her friends brought a map and put on the map where grocery stores in Mahoning County were. And she had no grocery store even close to her neighborhood. She was not quite Medicare eligible. She was a little under 65. She held 2 jobs. She talked about how difficult it was to me. She wasn't complaining, but she was just telling me about her life. And she said to buy fresh fruits and vegetables, she had to take the bus down to, because the bus system in Youngstown's far too underfunded, to downtown, to the bus center downtown, and then take another bus out to the suburbs. And she could only buy enough groceries that she could carry, so she couldn't buy that many groceries. She said, if I'm lucky, I only have to wait 5 to 15 minutes at the downtown bus center sometimes to get out to Austintown to the grocery store. But she said other times I wait 30 or 45 minutes. So the whole trip, not counting being in the grocery store, was often well over an hour and a half often. And then her time in the grocery store. And again, she had to do this fairly often if she wanted anything fresh, and she couldn't carry very much. And I mean, that's what happens when we have an underfunded transit system. That's what happened. Those are people that you take care of. When she goes to the doctor, she'll often have to take 2 or 3 buses. I mean, you know these stories. You serve people like this. You understand this better than anybody. So tell those stories as you go on Capitol Hill in the next couple of days. Get House and Senate members out to your transit systems and have them see what you do. I mean, show them, give them a tour, take them on a bus, ask them to ride with one of your drivers sometimes. Get people to really understand what you do. There's a wonderful, Pope Francis exhorted his parish priests to go out and smell like the flock, in a way that, understand how people live their lives. Abraham Lincoln said when he was president during the Civil War, his staff would say, you got to stay in the White House and win the war and free the slaves and preserve the unions. He said, no, I want to go out and get my public opinion bath. I want to see what people are doing. And most of my colleagues, and we're all guilty of this, we we do visit, we typically see most people we talk to sing with an upper-class accent. We don't see how most people live their lives, and you do, and you know the people you serve. I don't mean you just serve low-income people, of course, but I mean I know what valuable service you give to the community, and most members of Congress don't ride buses very often. And most members of Congress don't see exactly what you do, so teach us that. There was a wonderful civil rights, in the 1960s, a civil rights leader once said, and I think of groups like you and what you do, and I think of this quote, he said, don't tell me what you believe, show me what you do. Don't tell me what you believe, show me what you do, and I'll tell you what you believe. So show us all, show people in Congress what you stand for, what you are, whom you serve, how you do it. It will mean we will continue to build on an already pretty darn good transit system in this country and prepare better and better for the years ahead. So thank you all for your service and the work that you do. Thank you.